When my husband Richard died of a heart attack at 72, I thought the world had ended. For 43 years, I was Mrs. Richard Grant of Savannah, the woman who made sure the historic townhouse on Whitaker Street was polished like a jewel. I cooked Sunday dinners, hosted book club meetings in the parlor, and filled the garden with azaleas Richard loved to boast about. I believed I had a family, a home, and a place in this world. But grief has a way of showing you who people really are. My only daughter, Isabella, appeared at the funeral in a sleek black dress and designer heels, her face touched with just the right amount of sorrow. She hugged me as mourners whispered condolences, but there was calculation in her eyes. She had always been her father's favorite, his brilliant little lawyer, who conquered every courtroom she entered. She had a husband, Marcus, a banker who collected watches and looked at people the way men in boardrooms look at numbers, assets, or liabilities. I was not an asset. Mom, Isabella said 2 weeks after the funeral, her voice coated in concern. You can't possibly manage this house alone. The stairs, the repairs, all those memories, it isn't healthy for you. At first, I believed her. She sat at the dining table, her manicured hands resting on glossy pamphlets about retirement communities outside Savannah. Look at these, she said. You'd have friends your age, no stress. You could finally relax, but as days passed, her concern grew into insistence. Marcus visited with her, and together they circled me like hawks over prey. Eleanor, Marcus said with a salesman's smile, these communities are wonderful investments in peace of mind. You'll love the independence. Independence. That word twisted like a knife. I had been independent all my life, managing this house, this family, while Richard built his reputation. Now my independence was being reduced to a tiny apartment in a complex for active seniors. The final blow came on a humid Tuesday afternoon. Isabella walked in without knocking, 2 large suitcases rolling behind her. Mom, we've made a decision, she announced. Marcus just got a promotion. We need to move into town immediately. This house is perfect for us. I stared at her, not comprehending. Move in? But this is my home. Her mask slipped for the first time. Cold calculation hardened her voice. Actually, according to Dad's will, everything belongs to me. The house, the accounts, all of it. I've been letting you stay here out of kindness, but it's time you found your own place. I couldn't breathe. Surely there's been some mistake. No mistake, she cut me off. Dad knew I'd take better care of his legacy than you ever could. You never understood money. You were just the wife. Just the wife. 43 years reduced to 3 words. Then she struck the cruelest blow. Find somewhere else to die, Mom. You're useless now. And like an obedient mother, I packed my bags. The Sunset Inn sat on the edge of Savannah's highway, its neon sign flickering like a broken heartbeat. That was where Isabella and Marcus left me, as though I were an unwanted guest who had overstayed her welcome. The room smelled faintly of mildew and old smoke. The thin carpet patterned with stains no one had bothered to clean in decades. I sat on the sagging mattress, my 2 suitcases at my feet, and listened to the sound of trucks roaring past outside. My daughter had handed me $200 in cash before driving away in their gleaming Mercedes, telling me it would cover me for a few days. $200 after 43 years of building a home, raising her, and sacrificing everything I might have wanted for myself. That night, I stared at the ceiling, replaying Isabella's words, "You were just the wife. Find somewhere else to die." Each time I repeated them in my head, the pain grew sharper, not duller. I thought of Richard, of how he used to sit in his leather chair by the window, reading through stacks of papers with meticulous care. He had been obsessive about details, bank statements filed by year, insurance policies labeled in neat handwriting, even grocery receipts stacked in envelopes. He never left anything to chance, and that was what gnawed at me. Because years earlier, Richard had shown me a will. He had explained it patiently, pointing to each clause, making sure I understood. "Eleanor," he'd said, "you'll always be taken care of." He hadn't been perfect, stubborn, patronizing at times, but he wasn't cruel. He would never have left me destitute. So how could Isabella claim everything now belonged to her? I remembered one evening not long before his heart attack. Richard had been quieter than usual, his eyes heavy with some private burden. As we sat on the porch, he said softly, "I worry about Isabella. She doesn't understand the weight of money. Entitlement blinds her. Promise me you'll be careful after I'm gone." At the time, I brushed it off as a father's worry. Now those words returned with chilling clarity. Could it be that Isabella had lied? The next morning, I sipped weak motel coffee and opened the battered laptop I'd brought with me. Using the shaky Wi-Fi, I searched for the name of Richard's attorney, Jonathan Wells. He was the man Richard trusted for everything from property deeds to estate planning. If anyone knew the truth, it would be him. It would cost me the last of the cash Isabella had tossed at me to take a bus downtown. But I felt something I hadn't felt in weeks. Not grief, not despair, determination. The bus rattled through Savannah's oak-lined streets, past rows of antebellum houses with their wrought iron balconies and moss-draped trees. I clutched my worn leather purse, feeling out of place among the tourists with cameras and iced coffees. When I finally stepped off near Monterey Square, my eyes fell on a stately white-columned building with a brass plaque that read, "Jonathan Wells, Attorney at Law." Richard had been coming here for decades. Inside, the air smelled faintly of lemon polish and old paper. A young secretary in a navy dress looked up in surprise when I gave my name. "Mrs. Grant? Oh, Mr. Wells will be glad to see you. Please write this way." Jonathan Wells was in his 70s, silver hair combed back neatly, his voice warm with the cadence of old Savannah. He rose when I entered, extending both hands. "Eleanor, my dear, I was wondering when you'd come." His words confused me. "You were expecting me?" He frowned. "Of course. We had a will reading 3 weeks ago. I assumed you were too distraught to attend. Isabella said she'd keep you informed." The blood drained from my face. "A reading? I was never told." Isabella said Richard left everything to her. For the first time, the attorney's genial expression hardened. He pulled a thick folder from his desk drawer and opened it with deliberate care. "Eleanor, I gave Isabella the original will and multiple copies. She said you'd chosen not to be present. But what she told you is impossible." He began to read aloud, his voice steady. "I, Richard Samuel Grant, being of sound mind and body, do hereby bequeath to my beloved wife, Eleanor May Grant, our primary residence at 14 Whitaker Street, including all furnishings and personal effects. Additionally, I leave her 65% of all financial assets, investments, and accounts, totaling approximately $18 million. My breath caught. $18 million. The townhouse. Everything I had built my life around. Jonathan looked at me gently. And as for Isabella, he turned a page, his voice tightening. "To my daughter, Isabella Grant Whitmore, I leave $10 million to be held in trust until her 45th birthday, contingent upon her treatment of her mother following my death." My heart pounded. "Contingent?" He nodded. "Your husband was worried about her entitlement, about how she spoke to you. He wanted her inheritance tied to respect and dignity." I whispered, "But she threw me out. She said I was useless." Jonathan closed the file with finality. "Then she has violated the condition. By law, Isabella has forfeited her inheritance. Eleanor, you are the sole beneficiary of Richard's estate, house, accounts, assets. In total, $28 million. The room spun. The daughter who told me to disappear had lied, cheated, and in doing so, had destroyed her own future. For the first time since Richard's death, I felt something rise in my chest that wasn't grief, power. Jonathan Wells wasted no time. After showing me the will, he picked up his phone with the urgency of a man who had seen fraud before. Within an hour, we were joined by Detective Maria Torres, a sharp-eyed woman in her 40s, from the Savannah Police Department's Financial Crimes Unit. She listened as Jonathan explained the situation, flipping through the forged documents Isabella had presented. "These signatures are traced," Detective Torres said. tapping the page with her pen. Sloppy work, but sophisticated enough to fool someone not trained to see it. Whoever drafted these had access to legal templates, likely your daughter's husband, given his background in banking. The word forgery stung like a fresh wound. My own daughter, my flesh and blood, had orchestrated this. What happens now? I asked, my voice tight. First, we'll freeze every account she's tried to move under her control, the detective said firmly. Second, we'll begin an elder abuse and fraud investigation. Mrs. Grant, what your daughter did is a felony. She deliberately misled you, excluded you from the reading, and used forged documents to gain property she had no right to. Hearing those words should have crushed me, but instead they steadied me. For weeks, I had felt like a helpless widow, clinging to scraps of dignity. Now, I was being told I was the victim of a crime, and the law was on my side. That afternoon, I returned to the motel, clutching copies of the real will and Detective Torres's assurances that justice would follow. I hadn't even set my bag down before my phone rang. The screen lit up with Isabella's name. My hand trembled, but I answered. "Mom," she said sharply, no trace of kindness left. "What did you do?" "The bank just froze our accounts. Marcus's credit cards were declined." "They're saying something about a court order." I closed my eyes, steadying my breath. "What I did," I said slowly, "was visit your father's attorney. I know the truth, Isabella, about the will, about the trust, about everything you tried to hide." There was silence, then a nervous laugh. "Mom, you're confused. Jonathan must have mixed up the papers. I was only protecting you. You've never handled investments. Dad wanted me to make sure everything ran smoothly." "Protecting me?" My voice shook, but it wasn't fear anymore. It was fury. "By throwing me out of my home, by handing me $200 like a maid you'd dismissed. That's not protection, Isabella. That's cruelty. And now it's a crime." Her voice cracked. "You wouldn't dare press charges. I'm your daughter." I almost pitied her in that moment. Almost. "You should have thought about that before you forged your father's signature. Detective Torres will explain the rest to you." And for the first time in weeks, I hung up first. For the first time since Richard's death, I slept without fear of the motel's thin walls. Jonathan had arranged for me to return briefly to the townhouse, my townhouse now, under police supervision. Walking through the carved wooden doors, I expected to feel grief. Instead, I felt possession. The home Isabella had tried to steal pulsed with memories of me, not her. But as I moved through Richard's old study, something unsettled me. His mahogany desk was always neat, but inside the drawers I found files labeled with names I didn't recognize, consulting contracts, wire transfers, payments to companies I had never heard of, registered in places like the Cayman Islands and Panama. At first I thought they were ordinary business dealings, yet the amounts were staggering. Millions moving through accounts that seemed to exist only on paper. I brought the documents to Jonathan. His face darkened. "These aren't normal consulting fees. Eleanor, I think Richard was involved in something questionable. We should bring in a professional investigator." Enter David Chen, a private investigator who specialized in financial crimes. He spent hours in the study, his camera clicking as he photographed ledger entries and contracts. Finally, he looked up at me, his expression grave. "Mrs. Grant, these look like shell companies. Classic vehicles for money laundering. If what I'm seeing is accurate, your husband was either moving dirty money or helping someone else do it." The floor seemed to tilt beneath me. Richard, the man who corrected my grocery lists and insisted we tithe faithfully at church. I wanted to protest, to deny it, but the papers didn't lie. That evening, as the sky turned violet over Savannah, I heard a knock at the door. Against my better judgment, I opened it. Isabella and Marcus stood there, their polished composure rattled, but not broken. "Mom," Isabella began, her tone sharp, "we need to talk." "I have nothing to say to you." Marcus stepped forward, his voice oily smooth. "Actually, Eleanor, you do. We know about Richard's offshore accounts. We know the money isn't clean. If the authorities get their hands on this, they'll seize everything, including the house. But if you sign control over to us, we can manage it quietly. Protect you." The audacity stole my breath. Isabella folded her arms, her eyes glinting. "Think carefully, Mom. You'll lose it all. Do you really want to spend your last years in courtrooms and investigations?" I stared at my daughter, my own flesh and blood, realizing she wasn't just greedy, she was dangerous. For weeks, I had been mourning Richard and fearing my future. But at that moment, one truth crystallized. Isabella and Marcus weren't simply trying to steal from me. They were trying to blackmail me, and I was done being their victim. I didn't sleep that night. I sat in Richard's study, my study now, staring at stacks of documents under the yellow glow of the desk lamp. The numbers blurred together until one fact became clear. I was in over my head. This wasn't just about inheritance anymore. This was about criminal money. The kind that didn't just ruin reputations, it destroyed lives. By morning, I knew what I had to do. I dialed Jonathan, my voice steady. "We can't handle this alone. We need the FBI." Within hours, I was on a train to Atlanta, escorted quietly by Detective Torres. The Savannah field office didn't have jurisdiction over the larger crimes Richard's files hinted at, but Atlanta did. That's where I met Agent Clara Mitchell. She was in her 40s, tall, withy, with the kind of presence that filled the room before she spoke. Her eyes were sharp, but not unkind, and for the first time in weeks, I felt I was in the company of someone I could trust. "Mrs. Grant," she said, sliding the folders across the table, "we've been watching some of these accounts for years. Your husband wasn't just moving money. He was working with us. He was an informant." The words hit me harder than Isabella's betrayal. "An informant, Richard?" Agent Mitchell nodded. "For more than a decade, he fed us information about organized crime families, laundering money through shell companies here in Georgia and beyond. To maintain his cover, he had to appear complicit. The funds he managed weren't stolen. They were part of a sanctioned operation. And the money left to you? It's legitimate. Payment for years of cooperation." I pressed my hands to my face. Richard, secretive and meticulous, had been playing a role even I never suspected. He'd died before telling me. My grief twisted into something more complicated. Relief that he wasn't corrupt. Sorrow that I never knew the whole truth. Agent Mitchell's voice softened. "Your daughter and son-in-law don't know this. They've only seen enough to believe Richard was laundering money. They're trying to blackmail you with half the story. But we can turn that to our advantage." She leaned forward. "Would you be willing to help us catch them? Wear a wire. Let them incriminate themselves in their own words." My pulse thundered in my ears. The idea of sitting across from Isabella and Marcus, listening to their schemes while secretly recording them, terrified me. But then I remembered Isabella's cold eyes, Marcus's smirk, the way they spoke of me as though I were already dead. I straightened my shoulders. "Yes, I'll do it." For the first time, the fear that had ruled me since Richard's death gave way to something else. Resolve. 2 nights later, I sat in the parlor of my Savannah townhouse, the same room where Richard once read poetry aloud on Sunday evenings. Now it was wired with hidden microphones. A slim recorder rested against my ribcage under my blouse. Every breath I took felt amplified, every heartbeat echoing like a drum. Agent Mitchell had gone over the plan a dozen times. Let them talk. Don't confront too early. Draw them out. We'll be listening from the van outside. At exactly 8 o'clock, headlights swept across the windows. Isabella and Marcus arrived together, dressed as though for a boardroom meeting rather than a family conversation. Marcus carried a sleek leather briefcase. Isabella smiled, but her eyes glittered with tension. "Mom," she said, kissing my cheek like nothing had happened. "You look better than I've seen you in weeks. I knew you'd come to your senses." I forced a smile, my palms damp. Clarity has that effect. We sat at the polished mahogany table. Marcus snapped open his briefcase, pulling out a thick folder. "Here's the arrangement. You retain the house and a clean $5 million in assets, immunity from any fallout regarding Richard's activities. In exchange, you sign over the remaining accounts to us. Simple, clean, and everyone walks away happy. Clean assets, I repeated slowly, tilting my head. That's an interesting phrase. What about the 28 million Richard left me? Isabella's smile faltered. Mom, that money is tainted. If the feds investigate, you'll lose everything. Marcus and I can protect you, but only if you cooperate. Marcus leaned in, lowering his voice. Think of this as insurance. You're too old to handle the stress of federal scrutiny. Let us carry that burden. My heart pounded. I glanced at the chandelier, knowing agents were listening through a microphone hidden in its frame. So you're saying if I don't sign, you'll turn me in, expose Richard? Silence. Then Marcus smirked. We'd hate to. But yes, better we control the narrative than the FBI. The words hung in the air, damning and undeniable. My fingers tightened around my glass of water. This was the moment Agent Mitchell told me to wait for. I looked at Isabella, my own daughter, her face smooth with arrogance. You know what's funny, Isabella? I said softly. Dad always thought you'd betray me. He left a clause in the will about treating me with dignity. He knew exactly who you were. Her eyes widened, fury breaking through her calm facade. You set us up! The door burst open. Agents in dark jackets stormed the parlor. Isabella Grant Whitmore and Marcus Whitmore, you're under arrest for conspiracy to commit fraud, elder abuse, and attempted extortion. Isabella's scream split the air as handcuffs clamped around her wrists. Marcus tried to rise, but an agent shoved him back down. I sat frozen, my hands trembling, but inside me, a storm of vindication swelled. For weeks, I had been powerless. Tonight, I was the one holding all the cards. 6 months later, sunlight streamed through tall windows of the townhouse, illuminating walls painted in colors I had chosen, not Richard's. The heavy drapes he insisted on were gone, replaced with airy curtains that let the Savannah breeze roll through. The study that once smelled of dust and secrets was now my art studio, bright and alive with canvases splashed in blues and golds. For the first time in decades, the house reflected me. The trials had been brutal, but liberating. Isabella and Marcus each received federal sentences, 18 months for fraud, forgery, and attempted extortion. The scandal made headlines in Georgia, their fall from grace dissected by every local paper. Friends who once gushed about Isabella's brilliance now crossed the street to avoid her name. For me, though, the outcome was different. I was no longer invisible. With Jonathan's guidance and Agent Mitchell's support, I launched the Eleanor Grant Foundation for Elder Justice, using a portion of the inheritance to fund legal aid for seniors preyed upon by their own families. I spent mornings in meetings with advocates, afternoons painting in my studio, and evenings walking past the fountains in Forsyth Park, breathing air that tasted of freedom. The media caught wind of my story. Channel 12 interviewed me first, then newspapers across the state. By autumn, a national network came calling, pitching a documentary about elder financial abuse. At first I hesitated. Airing my family's betrayal to the world felt cruel, but then I thought of the countless others suffering silently. If my pain could protect someone else, maybe it was worth it. One morning, a letter arrived from Isabella, the 17th since her sentencing. I didn't open it. The first few had been filled with excuses, blaming Marcus, grief, or stress. Later ones were apologies, begging forgiveness. But forgiveness without accountability is hollow, and I had no interest in rebuilding a relationship built on ashes and lies. Family isn't blood, I realized. It's loyalty. It's the neighbor who brings you soup when you're sick, the friend who answers your midnight call, the people who defend you when you are weakest. Blood had betrayed me, but loyalty had saved me. As I washed my brushes that afternoon, I caught my reflection in the studio window. The woman staring back wasn't the grieving widow who'd been thrown out with 2 suitcases. She was someone reborn, strong, independent, unafraid. I thought of Isabella's words, find somewhere else to die. How wrong she was. I hadn't found somewhere to die. I had found somewhere to live, truly live, for the very first time. And maybe that was the lesson all along. The best revenge isn't punishing those who hurt you. It's becoming everything they never believed you could be.